Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, really, really exciting to be here today. And thank you so much to Peanut for hosting this. I love talking about weaning. It's absolutely my favourite topic in the world. I think that for me, my main aim in my career and everything I do is to try and offer parents confidence when it comes to feeding their babies and children. So that is genuinely my main aim. I've been working in this field for a long time. I've got an undergraduate and postgraduate degree in nutrition, and I was trained in the NHS around maternal, infant and child nutrition, and just loved it, and just realized what a big change you can make to people and to children in their whole lives if you start nice and early by making changes to nutrition intakes in really young kids. And weaning is no exception. Weaning is such an important time, but it's also a time where a lot of parents get a lot of anxiety. So I'm going to talk a bit today. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see my presentation. There's not much present in terms of presentation. It's mainly going to be me talking, but I will just share this now with you. So, yeah, a little bit about me. I guess I am a registered public health nutritionist, and I'm also I'm registered with the Association for Nutrition, and I've been working for the last year or so with Joe on his Weaning 15 project and his Weaning 15 book, which was one of the best things I've done in my career, the absolute highlight. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed, kind of broadening out to a really wide audience and helping to answer questions. One of the things I just have learned is that parents need confidence when it comes to weaning their children, and as soon as they've gotten their confidence, it's like, boom, right, we can carry this away now and we know what we're doing. So confidence is so key, and it's something I really strive to pass on to lots of parents. So yeah, I also do lots of media. I used to do a lot more media work, but just since having 2 kids of my own and doing lots of social media myself, I don't have as much time to do all of the media stuff. But I used to be on a lot of the media channels, on Channel 5 News quite regularly and things like that. But I've been still do lots of quotes for lots of papers and things. So you may have seen my name there about. So we're going to talk today about weaning, about introducing solid foods to our baby. And this, as I like to call it, is a bit of a mini masterclass. So it's going to be a whistle-stop tour through weaning, because we've only got about half an hour today for me to go over this with you. And then I'm going to answer loads of questions at the end. If you guys want more information and advice, believe me, there is so much on my website and on my Instagram page. And also I run webinars. So there's loads more content that you can get if you still are left with questions. Hopefully this will do exactly what I said, just help to give you that confidence before you start. So when it comes to how do I even begin? This is a question lots of people are asking, when it comes to the very first start of their journey. They want to know, I don't even know what to do. I've been reading online, I'm not sure where to start. And what I always say is just try and get a little bit of information to help you feel confident before you start. So, NHS has really great resources online. There's places like the British Nutrition Foundation that have great information on weaning, and of course my website and my Instagram can help you to just do that bit of reading, because if you start and you just feel like, do you know what, I kind of know what I'm doing, it can make all the difference rather than being like, I don't even know where to start. So the question of how do I even begin is a really important one. And I think, you can read so much online. So there's a lot of conflicting information, and parents often say this to me, I read so much conflicting stuff, I never know what to do or where to go. But, just kind of being able to kick off with those few questions answered is really key. So when it comes to lockdown now, actually, during the first lot of lockdown, I was doing loads and loads of online talk because so many parents were really worried about what do I do about the fact that it's lockdown. My baby is just about to turn 6 months. Should I wait? Should I delay it? Should I introduce early? What should I do? Because we're in this lockdown environment. Honestly, one of the things I want to do today is to reassure you that, first of all, even though we're locked down, emergency services, doctors, hospitals, allergy clinics, most things are still going and ticking along as they were before lockdown. So there is no reason that you need, not to start during lockdown. Absolutely not. And I would definitely be saying, try not to delay offering those solid foods, because we often talk about around 6 months being a bit of a window of opportunity when you can start introducing baby to all these new foods, and they're a bit more ready to accept those foods at that time. So I would say try not to delay. definitely kickstart your journey, and know that if there were, which is very unlikely, any reason that you needed, hospital, if there was a choking risk, if there was your little one had an allergic reaction. First of all, allergic reactions, the very first allergic reaction your baby had is normally fairly mild, okay, in most situations, if they were to have an allergic reaction. And bear in mind that only 5% of 2-year-olds actually have any diagnosed allergies, so it's not very likely that's going to happen. But if they would, the emergency services are still there, the hospital is still there, and 111 is still there, 999 is still there. So there is no reason not to start weaning your baby. Also, in the very first lockdown, we had some food shortages, so some parents are slightly worried about food shortages, but that seems to be not a problem anymore. So again, when it comes to lockdown, there's no reason why we couldn't start. And actually, I think lockdown has been a perfect opportunity for a lot of families to actually start that journey, because you're at home, you've got time, you're not rushing anywhere, and also you've got much more time to have baby in to be part of that family meal. So for me, I think we need to think of lockdown as a positive and a really great way that we can actually be with our babies and closer with our babies, and still have all those services if we happen to need them. So I hope that makes sense when it comes to that. So what I'm going to talk about now is, as I said, talk you through my weaning mini masterclass. So it's not every single detail, but it is the majority of what you need to know to get started. So first and foremost, get prepping. One of the most important things that I often say when we start weaning is to try and get equipment. Now, you don't need much, you need basic kitchen equipment. So we're talking pots and pans and spoons and forks and a knife, and maybe a hand blender, or if you've got a blender, they can be really, really handy if you're thinking about making mashes and purees for baby as their first food. You really don't need much. You might need cloths, and you might need things like to lessen that mess a little bit, and a high chair for your baby. So the things that you mainly need are things you already have in your kitchen, and the extras are things like little baby cups, which can be useful, high chairs, maybe little pots to take food out and about, or put food in the freezer, baby spoons, and baby plates and bowls, and maybe a hand blender. So those are really the things that you need when you start. And it's really, really good to be organised and to have all of that stuff ready for when you do begin, so that you don't, again, get to the point of thinking, oh my goodness, it's 6 months, what do I even do? Where do I start? I haven't got any equipment. And the reason why we have baby equipment is just simply because a lot of it will end up on the floor, and also just to try and get those textures right, and also, again, keeping food safe on the go. So other than that, you really can just use a lot of what you already have at home, and that is not a problem at all. So I am, and if any of you follow me on social media, you'll know that I am a really big advocate of starting with veggies, and a concept that I tend to call veg-led weaning, which is essentially where you start and kick off the weaning journey with vegetables. Now, there is a reason for this. It's not just something I've kind of concocted and decided to run with. There's actually a lot of research that suggests that, in order to encourage and introduce children to like and be familiar with the flavour of vegetables, and even get them to accept foods, vegetables in later life, there's research that suggests that introducing them early as those very first foods can actually help with this. So traditionally, when it comes to weaning, what was recommended tended to be more like the sweeter, like apple, pear purees, baby rice. Those are much more traditional. And even when I started in the NHS, we would often talk about apple puree as a first food. And don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with doing that. There absolutely isn't. However, babies are born with a preference for sweet foods. They're born already accepting sweeter tastes, and weaning is about helping them to learn to like something new. So for me, I often say there's no reason why we need to start with those sweet tastes, because actually that's just going to be already reinforcing what children and babies already like. What I normally recommend is kicking off with vegetables, because if we kick off with vegetables, this is a very new taste. It's something that babies are not familiar with, and actually it's something that they tend to be a little bit reserved about at the start. So they'll be a bit unsure about those tastes, because they need to learn to like and to accept those very new flavours. So things like bitter veggies and bitter and savoury vegetables, neutral tasting foods like avocado, potatoes, are really, really good place to start. And I normally recommend around about 10 days, 2 weeks worth of veggies at the very start of weaning, and ideally a different veg every day. It doesn't have to be a completely different veg every single day, but you know, a variety in that 10 days or 2 weeks is key. So 10 days of a single taste of veggie, so just once a day, one meal a day. 10 days of a single taste of different veggies. So we could think things like, this is my son eating broccoli, and he loved the broccoli. He was actually on social media, people used to call him broccoli boy because he was always like this, covered in broccoli, loving it. But broccoli, things like broccoli, cauliflower, courgette, aubergine, spinach, potatoes, swede, I'm trying to think what else, green beans, and I just thought of really good, potato. So those are some really, really good ones that you can start with. Now, some of those work really well, and I'll move on to talk about textures in a second, but some of them don't work so well as finger foods, but some of them are perfect as a finger food and or a puree. But there we go. So ultimately, that's my kind of main recommendation, is to start that weaning journey with those veggies. And what that's been shown in research is that the more that children are offered veggies, and then once you move on to other foods and you start building in a variety into children's diet, as long as you're maintaining offering those veggies regularly, so I'm not saying every day, but you know, offering a variety of veggies along with lots of other foods, if you maintain that, then you are likely to have a child who will more readily accept those vegetables when they get older, therefore possibly less likely to be fussy, because often fussy eating is around vegetables. So hopefully that helps. So once we've gone through that 10 days of veggies, the next thing is about building in variety. Now, this image, you know, we're not saying offer tons of orange juice and things like that, but it's just looking at variety. So next step after we've done those 10 days is introducing lots of different foods. So we're talking about starchy carbohydrates, things like breads, pastas, rice, also proteins and iron-rich foods, which are really, really key. So things like meat, fish, eggs, lentils, beans and pulses, and then also sweeter foods, so sweeter fruit, sweeter veggies and fruits as well. So once you've done those days, it's about gradually starting to build those in and going from one single veggie a day to maybe you're building on that. So maybe you've got broccoli and potato, or you've got cauliflower and lentils, or you've got, you know, you can also start to build in some dairy. So you might have something like tomatoes with peas. You can start to build dairy into baby's diet from around 6 months. So after those first tastes, little bits of dairy like pasteurized yogurt, cheese, and whole cow's milk, as long as baby is not allergic to dairy, it's absolutely fine to start adding in small amounts too. So I hope that makes sense. It's basically just building on that variety, and you might go from one, you know, single veggie to combination, and then after a week or so you might start combining 3 veggies, three ingredients. So let's say, for example, it might be mashed up pasta with tomato and some beef, for example. So you're starting to really build mini meals. Now, there's only a few foods that are actually recommended to be avoided after baby gets to 6 months, and those are salt and sugar. Also, honey is not recommended to at least a year, but it's also an added sugar, so ideally delay offering that. Unpasteurized and some mold ripened cheeses are not recommended. Shark, swordfish and marlin are not recommended, and oily fish is not recommended more than 2 times a week. Also rice milk, and you do need to be careful with some of those more choking risk foods, such as things like whole grapes and whole nuts. They're not recommended till babies at 5 years of age. So hopefully that makes sense. When it comes to those foods to avoid. So apart from those, again, the world is your oyster. But ideally, when you're introducing the foods, it's really good to try and introduce them in small amounts, especially high fiber foods like things like lentils, beans and pulses, and anything that is an allergen. So things like fish, eggs, nut butters, all of those kind of foods are allergens. So it's a good idea to start really small amounts and offer those with a food that baby has already had and already tried, so that if there were a reaction, you know, okay, they've already had broccoli and they were fine, so I know that it's the nut butter that I stirred into that puree that is a problem. So Offer those allergens and some of those high fiber foods like whole grains and beans and pulses in small amounts to your baby to begin with, and gradually build up the amount that you offer. Once you've introduced allergens, because allergens are recommended to be introduced from 6 months of age, once you've introduced those allergens, it really is about and maintaining them in the diet. So you want to make sure you keep offering them, so as long as baby doesn't have a reaction, so that you can maintain tolerance. I hope that kind of makes sense. So when it comes to textures, textures is really important during the weaning stages. Now, some people love the idea of baby-led weaning, and some people are a bit afraid of it. Now, baby-led weaning is essentially the process where baby will help themselves and serve themselves to small pieces of food that they just pick up and pop in their mouth by themselves. Traditional weaning or spoon-led weaning is where baby is offered food off of a spoon. Now, for years and years, the NHS and other organisations have been recommending kind of a combination of the two, because we always recommend offering purees and or mashed foods, at the same time trying to introduce finger foods. And really, there's a best of both approach here. If you're offering finger foods and purees together, then baby can actually learn how to feed themselves with their hand. They can practice regulation, but they can also learn how to take food off of the spoon. And it's actually easier to get quite a lot of foods in the pureed textures than you might get just in finger food. So what you can see here is some different texture options. The first one on the left-hand side, well, it's left-hand side for me, I'm not sure if it is for you, but the left-hand side is a really thin puree. Now, you don't have to start with a really thin puree. You could start with the one next to it, which actually doesn't have any lumps in. It's all mashed up really well, and it's nice and smooth. It is a little bit thicker. Essentially, it's just got a bit less liquid and less water with it. So you could start with either of those if you wanted to. And ideally, you want to kind of move from 1 to 2 to 3. The third one here, again on the left, which is again mashed, but it's mashed a bit less. It still hasn't got any big lumps in it or anything, but it might have some smaller lumps, and it's got a lot less liquid. So you're adding less liquid and you're blending or mashing a bit less as you move through these. And then the third one is more chopped texture. So it's a food that's chopped, and again, as you move through the weaning journey, it might be that your baby moves through this fairly quickly, and at about 2-3 months in, they're kind of having chopped food, or it might be that baby's having chopped food maybe more like 10 to 12 months of age. It varies, but the important thing is to always make sure you move through those textures, because actually research shows us that babies who aren't moved through those textures nicely can actually have more difficulty with coping with textures later on. So by 9 months, we do want to be introducing baby to something like the bottom left-hand side one, which is a kind of mash with a few little soft lumps in. And ideally want those introduced by about 9 months of age. And at the same time, we can be offering finger foods to baby. So for example, I'm a massive fan of things like broccoli. Again, broccoli and cauliflower work really well. You can overcook veggies, but ideally you want them to be roughly the size and shape of an adult finger, so baby can hold them this and have a little bit coming out the top that they can put in their mouth. If you overcook things like veggie, so again, courgette, maybe you might remove the skin. Really soft cooked carrot, sweet potato, cauliflower. I'm trying to think what else is really good. Lightly toasted bread and really well cooked sticks of pasta, salmon, yolk. All of those are really, really great finger food options. And actually, if you're worried about moving baby through textures, or if you're worried about finger foods, then making sure you gradually move through the kind of puree textures or offer really soft finger foods can really help with baby's development and their skills around biting and chewing and swallowing. So I hope that kind of makes sense when it comes to textures. I've got loads of information on finger foods on my page. So if you check out my highlights on Instagram, there is a whole thing on textures, and there's a whole highlight on finger foods as well. Check those out. So this is also so key. And one of the things, I talk about confidence, but one of the things I really always try and instill with parents is instead of thinking about it as this kind of anxiety provoking time, try to, and I know it's easier said than done, believe me, I'm quite an anxious person. So, I totally appreciate that it's easy to say, don't be anxious, but the more that you can make your little one explore food. So, you can see little boy here, this is my friend's little boy, Leo. He's got food all over his face, all down his top. He's squeezing tomatoes in his hand. He's really exploring that food. And although it's messy, And although maybe he's getting almost none of that food in, actually that's still part of the journey. It's still part of them becoming familiar and exploring that food. So the more that you can encourage them to do that and to have fun around meal times, whether that be, you know, the kind of conversation between the two of you, the communication, the smiles, the encouragement, watching you eat, because he'll learn a lot from that, but which we'll talk about in a second. But the more that you make that mealtime fun and an interactive time where they can smash food about and play with it and taste it and all sorts, the more likely you will be to have a little foodie on your hand who really enjoys mealtimes and enjoys eating. So this point is so key. And it's often something that anxious parents can really forget. It's so easy to sit there and be like, you know, with a spoon in your hand going, please just try this, please just try this, and not just go, do you know what, if you don't eat any today, that's okay, you've got plenty of milk, and you are also, you know, you've got another meal coming in, you know, a couple of hours time. So if they don't eat at one meal, that's okay. You know, there's no need to worry, there's no need to panic or try and encourage them or overforce them to eat. So take the pressure off. Sit back, eat yourself, and just watch and explore the feeding and weaning journey with your baby. The other thing that is so key is this, which is role modeling. And role modeling makes such a difference, because babies learn what to eat, how to bite, how to chew, how to swallow from watching and observing you. So if they're sitting at the table and all that they can see is you with a spoon in your hand trying to get food into them, they're never really going to learn about the experience. They're not going to learn the enjoyment of food, and they're not going to learn the process of eating and the fact that, you know, it's really social to eat together. And I would say try and sit with baby at meal times, even if, you know, let's say they are having a broccoli puree, even if it's just that you're having a stick of broccoli with them and you're eating it, you know, you can do those overemphasized num 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 and ooh yummy and rubbing the tummy and all sorts of things like that. Engage them with the food and the process that you're going through. So definitely, as much as you can, role model. And if in doubt, if you ever go through periods of food refusal with your baby, which you probably will, it's very common. The weaning journey is not linear. It's not like, I've introduced food and now my baby eats. It is, oh, baby won't eat, baby will eat. Baby won't eat, baby will eat. It's totally normal for it to be like that. So don't worry if you go through periods of food refusal. But just remember back to some of these points, and definitely remember to role model. One of the main things I say to parents who come to me saying, my little one won't eat, is, are you eating with them? Because if you're not, it really, you know, really can help if you can do so. So role model key, always really key. The other thing that's key, and here's my little friend Leo again, looking super happy about his meals. The other thing is persistence and consistency. And these are two key elements of the whole weaning and feeding children and feeding toddler journey. Persistence, because sometimes your little one is going to, especially in those first 10 days or 2 weeks of veggies, you're not going to accept them straight away. Absolutely not, because that's a very new taste. It's something they've never tried before. And actually, you know, this kind of face from Leo here is really common, because they're going, what on earth is this? All I've had before is breast milk and that was sweet. So persistence is key, because we need to carry on offering those foods. If we take off any food that our baby makes a face like this at, we're going to end up very limited. If we, you know, think, okay, my baby doesn't like that, I'm not going to offer that again, we're going to end up doing that with a lot of foods, because there'll be lots of times when your baby just feels like, do you know what, I don't really fancy broccoli today. And so it doesn't mean they don't like it. They might just not fancy it. It might just be a surprise. It might just be a taste they didn't expect. So persistence is key. And we know from research that offering food up to about 10 times, sometimes more, is important to encourage familiarization and therefore acceptance of those foods. So keep trying. Other thing is consistency. If you are sometimes doing one thing and sometimes doing another thing, so for example with things like routines, or if one adult does something differently, or you know, if you're not consistent in your approach, then children will never learn how they should react. So for example, at mealtimes, if they refuse their food and you go, oh, okay, you're not eating that, let's take that away, let's give you some Weetabix, you know, and you pop that down in front of them, and they'll go, okay, next time this is going to happen. So next time that you try and offer them food and they go, no, I'm not having that, and you don't offer them Weetabix, they're going to be like, hold on a minute, why didn't I get my Weetabix this time? So ideally it's important not to offer alternatives, and just to make that your consistent approach, so that you're offering a food, And again, baby has multiple times to have milk and other foods during the day. So just try and be consistent between different families and in the way that you respond when your one responds. So I think we're pretty much there now. I've just got a few seconds to talk a little bit about this, which is about safe weaning. So I've talked a little bit about allergens and offering allergens to your baby. Now, as I said, during lockdown, it might seem scarier. As I said, it's very rare for baby to have a very severe allergic reaction on that first go. And if you're offering allergens by offering them one at a time, in small amounts, and as the only new food that day, and ideally early on in the day too, you're likely to be able to really quickly monitor and notice if there was allergic reaction. With allergens such as things like fish and eggs and butters and dairy foods and wheat, if you start to notice, if you offer that food, it's a really good idea to leave a couple of days gap before you offer another allergen. You don't need to only offer one food a day during weaning. So if your baby's never had avocado or potato and you offer avocado and potato together, that's fine because they're not allergens. But if there's an allergen like fish or meat, fish or egg or nut butters or cow's milk or shellfish or wheat, then with those, it's a good idea to offer them, leave a couple of days gap, just so you can check that there hasn't been a reaction to that food. It's very unlikely to happen a few days later, but it's a good idea to be able to easily monitor by leaving that little gap. And when it comes to choking, on the left-hand side here, you can see these are some of the foods that are more likely to cause choking. So we've got olives, dried fruits, beans, raw carrot and raw apple, large cherry tomatoes, large blueberries, chunks of cheese, large seeds, large nuts, and grapes, whole grapes, and obviously these sweet during weaning day. It's not to say you can't offer them. You can appropriately prep them, so you can cook them, you can grate them, you can puree them, you can turn them into nut butters, you can mill them, you can chop them, you can crush them, and that can help to make those foods a bit more appropriate. But these are some of the foods that I would definitely be saying to be careful with and to avoid a little bit during the weaning journey. And again, these resources I do have on my Instagram and on my website, so you can absolutely see back to these again if you want to. The other thing to say is I would massively recommend anyone who is even slightly anxious, I would really, really strongly recommend that you go on some kind of first aid course. I know lots of people who run them, and there's lots of people doing them online during lockdown at the moment as well, and they're not expensive to attend. So I would definitely recommend going on a first aid course. Learn what to do if your little one does choke or does have an allergic reaction. So I hope that kind of helps. As I said, it's a whistle-top tour through weaning, but I think I've covered kind of most of the points, and hopefully that's helped to give you a little bit of confidence. I'm really, really happy to stick around now and answer some questions. I can see there's 5 in the Q&A box, but if anyone has any extra questions that they would like to ask, please do pop them in the Q&A box, and I'm really, really happy to stay and help get some of those answered. There's nothing in the chat, which is fine, but yeah, if you want to add any questions to the Q&A box, I will absolutely go through answering those now. So first of all, someone has said, what kind of cheese? Oh, good question. I've actually just done a post on cheese. If you go onto my Instagram page, there's a blog which talks about different cheeses. But to be honest, as long as it's pasteurized and it's not mold ripened soft cheeses, absolutely fine to offer. So things like cheddar cheese is not a problem. It's just about the quantity that you offer. Cheese is actually quite nutrient rich, so it's good. You can offer that into babies' foods, but just in small amounts, because they'll be getting most of the calcium that they need from breast or formula milk. So hopefully that helps to answer that question. How long does one give mash food and when to move on to the next consistency? So hopefully I kind of answered that when I was talking with you through those textures. It really varies. So some children move through quite quickly, especially if they are having lots of finger foods at the same time. They tend to move through textures really easily. Other children take a little bit longer, and it's really important to go at your baby's pace. But the one thing I would say is you try and make sure you always moving forwards. So move through those textures by stealth. Ultimately, what I'm saying is gradually, day by day, you're using a little bit less liquid, you're maybe blending a little bit less, maybe for the first week, keep them quite pureed, and then you might start adding less water or less liquid to the puree and mashing and pureeing it a little bit less and a little bit less. So do that by stealth, but let your baby lead you. If you start with the texture and your baby's like and can't take it, then of course you can go back a little step, but make sure you're always moving forward with those textures. So I hope that kind of helps to answer. And I do have a vlog on that topic too. How do you get baby to start using an open cup for water? This is a great question. That's a good point as well. So open cups are recommended at the start of weaning. So I would normally say to offer about an inch of water in an open cup, which has either got handles or some kind of grip for baby to grab. Some of the ones I like are the doily cup, the Cogney Kids cup, and the baby cup. They're all really, really great options for different reasons, to be perfectly honest. And it's not about getting your baby to drink lots of water, okay? So it's not about getting them to be guzzling lots of water. What you're trying to do is you're trying to encourage your baby to learn how to sip water from a cup. So what you will find at the start of weaning is that water gets picked up and poured in the food, splashed on the floor, thrown around everywhere. Eventually baby will learn how to take it, and especially if you're doing lots of role modeling. So don't worry if they're not taking lots of water. Most of their fluid is coming from their milk and in some of their foods. You don't need to be encouraging them to drink up, but you do need to just keep offering it with mealtime so they eventually will learn how to take it. When do you expect a baby to actually start eating first taste? I'm on day 6 and baby has only taken very tiny taste so far. That's perfect. That's fine. That's really, really normal. Again, some babies take to weaning really easily and they're like, gobble, 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 give me more. And other babies are like, oh, not sure about this. Give me a tiny taste and that's it. That's fine. Definitely for the first couple of weeks, maybe to even month of weaning, it's just about getting those tastes in the palate and getting baby used to it. So as long as you, after those 10 days or 2 weeks of weaning, as long as you start offering a nice variety and making sure there's plenty of things like protein and iron rich foods in there, then you know that's all you can do. You can't force baby to eat. What you can do is role model, sit with them, make the mealtime fun, offer a variety of textures, so finger foods and puree, so your baby has time to explore, and just keep encouraging that exploration because they will get there. So what you're saying is absolutely perfectly normal for them to only have had tiny taste. That's exactly what we expect in that first week and even month of weaning. The mixed food you're referring to, is it for puree? Yeah, absolutely, but you also can do the same with finger food. So after those 10 days of single taste of veggies and you start combining, absolutely. So you could, let's say, you might do a chicken and carrot puree or chicken and carrot mash. I mean, to be honest, it's very hard to mash up meat, so you still possibly need to puree that and add it to a really soft cooked mashed carrot. But you can also do the same with finger foods as well. So when I'm talking about mixed foods, it can just be mixed finger foods of those. So if you're baby-led weaning, let's say, for example, you might have something like chicken and avocado. And again, you could roll that into a ball, or you could offer those as little sticks for baby to eat at the same time. So either, whichever way you prefer. When should I start giving formula-fed baby water? So kind of answered that. Very start of weaning, I would definitely say. Once baby gets to 6 months, you don't need to boil and cool it anymore. You can just offer it straight from the tap. What types of reactions should I look out for? So when you're weaning babies, again, I've got a blog all about this, but you might notice a rash, you might notice slight swelling, you might notice baby become a little bit itchy, or baby vomiting, or becoming distressed. So those are the kinds of signs, and their lips might swell a little bit, but those are the kinds of signs you might look out for. You'd normally expect a couple to happen. So if baby does get a little bit of a rash around their mouth, it doesn't necessarily mean they have having an allergic reaction. That could just be contact, and it could be something like the acid or the histamines that are in the food causing that little reaction. So you would expect to see a rash somewhere else on the body if it's an actual allergic reaction. But I'm not an expert on allergies. There are lots of dietitians, pediatricians, allergen specialists, first aid trainers who are much better than me. And that's why I've got a blog who's written by a pediatric dietitian who specializes in allergies. So do check that out. And I've got one also by a first aider that says what to look out for. So I've got loads more detail. It's really hard to go through allergies on here. How long can you leave a frozen puree in the freezer before throwing away? So this is a really great question, and actually one that I have had answered on a recent blog that a food standards mum, food safety mum, she's called, has written for me. Ultimately, it doesn't really. The nutrition won't change too much, so you can absolutely keep it in there for 3 to 6 months, but you might find that it becomes a little bit less of a nice texture for baby. So absolutely 3 months in the freezer is no problem. It might even be longer than that, but I'd need to check back to the blog. I can't remember off the top of my head, I'm afraid. Do remember that when we're freezing things like purees, you know, purees are only going to be early days. So I often say to parents, if you are freezing a load of purees, just remember that your baby's only going to be having purees for the first few weeks and maybe month or so of weaning before you're moving that texture up. So you don't want to have stacks and stacks of purees because at 10 months, they're just not going to be having that kind of food. How do I make sure my 7-month-old is getting enough iron? He refuses purees from a spoon, but is beginning to suck on bits of broccoli, sweet potato. So iron-rich foods are things like eggs, lentils, beans, pulses, nut butters, meat, chicken, fish. So ultimately what you want to do is just make sure that you're offering baby these kind of foods. So again, even if they're not getting huge amounts, that's okay, but just make sure you're still offering it. So when it comes to iron, it is really important to offer those foods. And I'd say once baby's on 3 meals a day, which your baby might not be on quite yet, but it's a good idea to offer iron rich foods at least twice a day. You know, again, giving your baby chicken and salmon is a good one, really easy for baby to eat and suck on. And the same with chicken, they can suck on some of the juices of something like that. Yolk's a really, really good one as well, and you can stir nut butters into some of the purees that they are having. Once they've you know, you found that they've tolerated it, you can stir some nut butters in to add extra iron to baby's meals. That helps to answer. When can spices be introduced? Great question. So spices can be introduced from 6 months. But I would always say wait until you have offered those first taste of food first. Ideally, you want baby to really become a bit more accustomed to food. So go through those first single tastes, start with the combinations, and once your baby's had quite a few combinations and a variety of foods, you can absolutely start to add spices into the diet. It's really important not to go too hot. So I'd say anything like cayenne or chili, you want to leave that off and don't offer too much of that. But you know, general spices, start small and offer the ones that you tend to have as a family. That's the best idea. Is it bad for the baby to start at 5 months instead of 6? So this is a good question, and ultimately you want to look out for signs of readiness. In the UK, we say around 6 months because we totally appreciate that every child is individual and they do develop at different stages. But you want to look out for the signs of readiness, which are that baby can sit up, hold their head and neck steady, that they can see food, it up and bring it towards their mouth by themselves, and that they have less of a tongue thrust reflex. So if you put your finger on their lip, they don't just go as a reaction. Babies who do have a really strong tongue thrust reflex will just push more food back out than they swallow, and that's a sign that they're not quite ready. So it really depends on those signs rather than just the age. How does mixing veg work if in baby-led weaning, or is it just that you offer 2 different veg? Exactly that. So hopefully that makes sense. But remember, it's not just veggies after those first 2 weeks. It's not just veggies. You want to explore variety. So like I said, pieces of pasta. If you're doing baby-led weaning, it does make it a little bit more difficult because it's just kind of sticks of food that you can give them. You can start to build on things like making meatballs and what have I made before? Things like avocado and quinoa. You know, you roll a ball of avocado in quinoa, and that can work really well. Porridge balls, oats. You know, cook oats really well so they're nice and thick, and then make them into little balls or little sticks for baby. So you can absolutely start to explore it with baby-led weaning too. Shape for finger food, size and shape of adult finger, so that the baby can hold it, because they have a palmar grasp at that age where they can just grab things in their palm and eat the food out of the top of their finger. But really importantly, you know, if you're baby-led weaning, people offer all sorts of shapes. So things like pieces of salmon, chunks of salmon, like I said, little balls can really be helpful for them. But just remember that they mainly have a palmar grasp, so most things are going to be palmed into their mouth, and they're not going to have much in the way of scooping. They develop the pincer grip, which is this kind of grip, and they don't develop that till they're roughly about 9 months of age. But having said that, it's really important to get them to practice with it before they get to 9 months. So things like sticks are great, and then moving on to things like balls and smaller. So hopefully that helps. Baby's 9 months, almost 10. I'm still struggling with what portion size is. So there are no portion size recommendations for young babies at all. And the reason for this is because, as I said before, appetites go up and down. Some babies are grazers and just have little bits of food, and other babies want huge, you know, amounts of foods at the start of weaning. So there is no portion size guide for babies. Most important thing is to what we call responsive feeding. Listen to your baby's signs of fullness. If they're turning their head away, clamping their mouth shut, pushing you away, pushing the bowl away, it means they don't want more, and you should stop the meal. Whereas if they're going, and they're wanting more food, or they scream when you take the bowl away and they get excited when you put the bowl back, that means they want more. So listen to your baby's cues. They are the best people to be able to regulate their own appetite. And again, I have a whole blog on portion sizes on my page too. Hi, I've started my son at 4.5 months on veg purees. Do you think stick to the same line as you said, 10 days? Or it's very difficult. If you started for a reason, like a pediatrician or a dietitian or somebody recommended that you started early, I would definitely go and chat with them and get their thoughts on it. It's really difficult for me to be able to advise because I don't know the background, and you know, I'd definitely be saying to check with your health visitor about it. To make sure that there is a reason, you know, that A, your baby's ready for it, but also what to do next. Ultimately, I would probably say yes, go along with veggies first for a bit longer. But once your baby gets to like 5.5 months, you can still start to explore a variety of other foods as long as they are ready and they're developmentally ready for solids. So I hope that helps answer that one. How do you get your baby to start drinking from a straw? Again, that's practice. So, you know, you can get them with an open cup, and then eventually they will just pick that up, you know, and especially if they learn how to sip from a cup and start learning that action, they will probably pick it up. It's just, again, practice makes perfect with all of these. At what point do you add a second meal? This is a good question too. So when you start weaning, as I said, you start with 1 meal a day. Once your baby seems to be accepting that meal and know that it's coming and is getting quite a bit of food in, then it's a good idea to move on to a second meal. And once you're on that second meal, again, give it a little bit of time, wait for your baby to be accepting it and eating plenty of, you know, actually swallowing plenty of the food they're having, and enjoying it. And you can move on to your third meal. It's really, again, about, people talk about baby-led weaning, but I love the idea of baby-led weaning. It's just being led by your baby when it comes to portion sizes, textures, finger foods, and when to add in those next meals. How much water, how many times a day? So lots of people asking questions about water. Again, I've got blogs on this, but it's just sips with meals. So I recommend, once baby's on 3 meals a day, offering water 3 times a day, an inch of water at meal times, and just little sips is all they need. With regards to carrots, broccoli, courgette, what's the best way to cook? So to be honest, it doesn't really matter. You can boil or steam. If you are boiling, it's a good idea to boil it in a little bit, you know, lower amount of water, so you're not leaching out lots of the nutrients. And you can actually use the water to make purees if you want to as well. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Steaming or boiling is fine. Initially, I would definitely say to overcook some of those veggies. So for example, broccoli, you might cook for 10 minutes rather than 8 minutes that we might do for us. Carrots actually take a lot longer than you think to get them squidged, so they squidge between your finger and thumb, which is what you want for finger foods. So carrots maybe more like 15 minutes. Courgette, I would remove the skin, and actually, again, they take about 6 minutes because they do really, really quickly without their skin, especially. So hopefully that helps to answer that. Any tips for reflux baby apart from starting early? So actually, it's really interesting you say that. There's not a massive amount of advice about starting, of evidence that reflux babies need to be started early. Lots of healthcare professionals do recommend it, but because Ada's got reflux, loads of people said to me, you're going to start early, and I'm not, because there isn't a huge amount of research that you need to start early. That's not to say that it can't help some children, so it absolutely can. And when it comes to the reflux babies, there is no advice on what foods you should or shouldn't offer. Ultimately, it's about, again, going with your baby. I would say if you've got a reflux baby, make a note. And if there are certain foods that seem to trigger the reflux, just leave them off for a little bit longer. But it really is individual. There's not one food or certain food groups necessarily that can cause it. Some children might be susceptible to some foods, like more acidic foods like tomato, like you said. But just keep a diary, make a note of those foods, because that is the key thing to do with young children. Sorry, with reflux babies. What are the signs baby's ready for food? Okay, to start a bit. So I've been over that now, so hopefully that one is answered. When do you start offering food at each meal? Eat 3 times a day after 10 days? Or hopefully, again, as well, I answered that one about moving from 1 meal to 2 meals to 3. Basically be led by your baby. Should we offer food before milk or milk before food? Great question. The NHS say actually offer food first, because it's, you know, the whole food before one is just for fun is not really accurate. Food before one should be fun, but it's not just for fun. So it is important that babies start to taste food, start to get those nutrients in, start to learn how to eat, how to bite, how to chew, how to swallow. So that's why the NHS, they offer food first, because they know that food and getting babies trying and moving through those foods is really important. I often say, as long as baby is not refusing meals after they've had their milk, it's okay to offer milk first, as long as your baby is still happy to eat the solid food. It's a good idea to leave a gap of roughly about an hour after a milk feed before you offer solid food. If you want to, you can absolutely offer solid foods first. It's completely up to you. And as I say, it depends on whether your baby is full up from their milk and doesn't want their solids, because that is definitely not what we want. Can babies have flax seeds and other seeds? Yes, again, I would still introduce them like an allergen. So I'd introduce them one at a time in small amounts and allow your baby to kind of explore that first. But yes, flax seeds and other seeds are fine. But again, I wouldn't offer them in huge amounts because they're very high fiber foods, and they're also high in lots of other nutrients as well. So definitely offer those, but you know, as I said, keep to small amounts and start small as well. So someone's raised their hand, but I'm not 100% sure why. I've got a few more questions to go through, and then I'm nearly done. So I have a stash of breast milk in the freezer I was thinking of using to prep some purees. Can I use frozen milk and refreeze once it's pureed? Oh God, you're really testing me now. So I have a blog on this. I have a blog all about it, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I know you can't do it with formula milk, and I don't think you can refreeze the breast milk. No, if you are making it up with formula milk, sorry, with breast milk, that's fine. I don't think you can refreeze it. I have got a blog for whoever this is, because it's anonymous on here. If you want to contact me on Instagram, I will send you my blog on this, or go to my website, which is www.srnutrition.co.uk, and go onto my blog. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you might need to go to another page. There is a whole thing on freezing and reheating purees for babies. And I also have it on my Instagram page. But sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't think you can know. Is it okay to start a bit earlier than 6 months if they're showing signs? Grabbing, put it in their mouth is 5 months too early. So yeah, so you want to see those signs. If you are seeing those signs, sitting up, grabbing food, being able to put them in their mouth, not, you know, having less of a tongue thrust reflex. If you're seeing those signs and you're seeing them on multiple occasions and baby seems ready, then yes, you can start introducing solid foods. It's best to be as close to 6 months as you can. So the NHS say around 6 months, and I would normally see that as more like 5.5 months. So if you can offer baby a little bit more in the way of milk, and try and get them as close to 6 months as you can, but it's not too early necessarily if you are seeing those signs. No. Is there anything particular to look out for when weaning a baby on a vegan diet? Yes, absolutely. There are certain nutrients that you really need to be careful of if you're weaning. I'm not saying you can't do it, you absolutely can, but things like iodine. Iodine comes from milk, and if you're not, mainly comes from milk in the UK diet, and there's not very much in other sources. So you might need to look at supplementing or offering fortified foods. Omega-3 is another thing that's really important for baby's brain development, and that comes mainly in fish. You can get it in things like crushed walnuts, crushed linseeds, and olive oil, but often the recommendations are that you won't necessarily get enough, so you might need to think about supplementing. Iron is an important one because it often comes from eggs and beans and pulses, but you can, as I say, get them from things like pulses and nut butters as well. So there's plenty of those that you can get. And what's the other one? Calcium. Again, lots of calcium in things like fruits and vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, nuts and seeds. So making sure you're including lots of those in the tofu is also a really good food to include during the weaning. I'm just trying to think what other nutrients, calcium. I think I've covered off the main ones. But yeah, I've got a blog all about weaning vegetarian babies, and that has a whole section on vegan, so you can absolutely check that out as well. And the last one I've answered, which is the flaxseed. So pretty much answered all the questions, I think. I'll just check in the chat if anyone's put anything in there. Nope, nothing in the chat box. So perfect. Hopefully you found that helpful. Now, you can absolutely find me on my social channels, which is at SR Nutrition, at SR_nutrition. I have a Facebook page and Twitter page and an Instagram page, so check those out and hopefully I'll be able to help you more. But